You keep searching for answers, but your mind never becomes quiet. Zen story, the sound of one hand. What should I do with my life? How do I stop overthinking? How do I finally feel peace? And so the mind keeps searching. One more book, video, explanation. One more answer that will finally fix everything. But strangely, the more humans search mentally, the noisier the mind becomes. Imagine this. Long ago, in an old Zen monastery hidden deep within the mountains of Japan, a young monk approached his master seeking enlightenment. The monastery stood quietly among tall cedar trees. Wind moved softly through bamboo forests. The world itself felt silent there. But inside the young monk's mind, there was endless noise, questions, thoughts, doubts, the desperate need to understand everything. One evening, the monk bowed before the old master and said, "Master, please teach me enlightenment." The old man looked at him quietly, then softly said, "You know the sound of two hands clapping? Now tell me, what is the sound of one hand?" The young monk froze. At first, he believed it was a puzzle to solve, so he began thinking constantly. Days later he returned and said, "One evening," the monk returned confidently, "I found the answer." The master looked at him quietly. The monk raised one hand and struck the surface of a river beside the temple. Water splashed through the silent air. "The sound of one hand," he said softly. The master shook his head. "That is the sound of water meeting the hand, not the sound of one hand." Days later, the monk returned again. He raised one hand into the strong mountain wind and swung it forcefully through the air. Whoosh! "The sound of one hand," he said confidently. The master smiled gently. "That is the sound of wind meeting the hand." Again, the monk searched. One morning he listened to birds singing at sunrise. Another night he sat beside waterfalls. Another evening he sat in complete silence, trying to hear the answer hidden inside stillness itself. But every answer failed, and slowly the monk became exhausted. At first he felt determined, then confused, then frustrated. The harder he tried to force understanding, the farther it seemed to move away. Soon, another fear entered his mind. What if I am simply not wise enough? What if enlightenment is only for greater people? Some people replay conversations for hours after they end. Some endlessly consume self-help content, yet still feel emotionally lost. Some spend years searching for the perfect path, while becoming too mentally exhausted to actually live. The mind keeps whispering, "One more answer, one more breakthrough. Then I will finally feel peace." But often, the searching itself becomes the disturbance. Months passed. One night, completely exhausted from trying to solve the question, the monk sat alone beneath the moonlight outside the monastery. Cold wind moved softly through the trees. The mountains stood silent beneath the night sky, and for the first time in months, the monk stopped trying, stopped searching for clever words, stopped forcing understanding. He simply sat there quietly, listening to insects in the grass, to wind through bamboo, to his own breathing, and slowly, something inside him became still, not because he found an answer, but because he finally stopped attacking the question, and in that silence, he understood. The next morning, the monk bowed before the master once more. This time, no answer was spoken. The old master simply looked into his eyes and smiled, because the kōan was never asking for words. It was pointing beyond thought itself. And maybe this is what modern humans are forgetting. Not every problem in life can be solved through endless thinking. Some truths only appear when the mind becomes quiet enough to notice them. Humans today live inside constant stimulation, notifications, opinions, comparison, noise. Even moments meant for rest become distraction. People wake up and immediately reach for their phones, eat while scrolling, fall asleep while consuming content. And slowly, silence itself begins feeling uncomfortable, because silence reveals what distraction hides: loneliness, fear, unprocessed emotion. And so the searching continues endlessly. But a noisy mind cannot hear life clearly. This is why stillness matters. Just small moments where the mind is allowed to breathe again. Sometimes healing begins very simply: walking quietly beneath trees, watching rain without touching your phone, drinking tea slowly, writing thoughts honestly into a journal, praying softly before sleep, listening to calming music, allowing silence to exist without immediately escaping it, because clarity often appears naturally when the inner noise settles on its own. The monk searched everywhere for the answer, but understanding arrived only when the search became quiet. Maybe it has simply been waiting beneath all the noise. Stop scrolling, start living.